also have Deanna, my other partner in crime here, the other half of the Root Cause Clinic affiliations. Let's just approve all the live streaming that we're doing. Perfect. And we're here together to present the Energy is Everything Summit. A little bit about us. We have a couple brands. So there is Root Cause Clinic, which is a bioenergetic testing laboratory. We're using biophysics-based analysis. So we're looking not at what is in the blood. We're not actually testing proteins, but we're working with physics to be able to make assessments electromagnetically. And you're going to actually have some visuals, videos, et cetera, to show you a little bit about what that looks like. And we have this service to the public. Now, we just recently actually launched Ether Laboratories, which is a separate endeavor that allows those of you who are practitioners in the health and wellness field to use this service with your own clients and to do so independently, meaning you do not have to work with Root Cause Clinic or be a provider under us to do that. There's also, as you see here to the right, our House of Hertz brand, where we feature microcurrent neurofeedback. This is a cutting edge with a lot of research behind it, technology currently in clinical trials, already having been under trials for the Veterans Administration with great results for things like PTSD and trauma and addiction. And now it is actually in St. Matthew's Hospital, pending successful completion. It might actually be able to be leveraged for reimbursement by insurance services. So some very exciting stuff that we have on the horizon. And of course, there is the Where Physics Meets Physiology course. And that is actually where we're going to take some of these samples and slides from today. So you will see the educational program that we have put together for interested parties, whether you're just Dr. Mom or you're a doctor with your own practice wanting to be able to speak from an evidence-based perspective in all circles and feel confident about it. We have an educational program that is 1,300 slides, 80 hours of lecture data review, hundreds of pages of textbooks, as well as office hours every week to support you in this endeavor. Those who graduate actually are able to go on to utilize the laboratory and be very confident in their ability to make these connect the dot moments, which you'll see a lot more of tomorrow after we lay the foundation today, and what that looks like as far as a real living, breathing story for somebody. Information is great. It's awesome, but if we can't apply it or it doesn't have some sort of a meaning, if we lose touch with why we want to learn, what we want to learn at all, then it's moot, right? So that is who we are in a nutshell. And there is me. And this is Deanna, who is moderating our chat here. So if you have anybody answering you back on behalf of RCC, that is Deanna doing that. And you are officially here, hosted by Where Physics Meets Physiology at the Energy is Everything Summit. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this. One moment here. Just want to make sure we are sharing. Yes, everybody can see the screen. Perfect. Okay, so energy medicine oftentimes conveys this very philosophical type of concept. We usually are conjuring to mind all of these images of shamans and smudging and tuning forks, chants, sound bowls, laying of hands, right? And if we're a bit more in the know, we kind of have already adopted into homeopathy, the latest gadgets, red light, infrared, pulse electromagnetic field therapy, all of this stuff, right? And that's correct. That is energy medicine. But that's not all that energy medicine is. Now, the purpose of the summit is to expand upon all of this imagery that I just painted for you and to discuss and really examine the side of energy medicine that, although being published, being paid to be researched, being patented even, is not being publicized. At Root Cause Clinic, we feel that being in the energy medicine business, if you will, or in this field, that in order to be able to destigmatize, legitimize, and to make this more accessible, to make it a household name, that the concept of energy medicine is something that we really need to allow for the language of science to enter the conversation. Now, it's a common phenomena that we internalize that the philosophical and the physics cannot come together, or that if they come together in the same conversation, that one has to exit for the sake of competing with the other. We happen to be of the opposite opinion. We believe that science does not take away from this. We believe that it actually only adds to it. It does not take away from the philosophical and the spiritual portion, if you will, of this experience. It will only add to it. Those are actually some words that are a little bit inspired by Nobel laureate Richard Feynman, my favorite physicist. Might I also remind you that all physics, before it is proven, is philosophy, right? So as with any subject, if we're going to be able to make this mainstream, we must present it with a proper language. We must use the language of science if we want our doctors to be able to be open to the faucets and avenues of this opportunity and what this field has as a potential for us. So today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to share with you real research, real money being spent to look at human health options as it stands from a biophysics, bio meaning biological, and physics encompassing the study of everything, if you will, or in this case, the study of energy and how energy is really used in biological organisms. So for the benefit of all, understanding everything we possibly can when it comes to human health and optimizing it. The reason why we're doing this is that the number one citation that is brought to our attention is that if this really existed, if this approach actually had merit, if it worked, why don't we know about it? Wouldn't we know about it? Would we? This must be a conspiracy, right? And so after you watch today's presentation, just as I was mentioning, perhaps you will agree with that statement, but you will agree with it in a whole new light, pun intended. So now to add to that, I just want to put it out there that about 20 years ago, when I was really beginning my study in agriculture science, I was very shocked to learn that there were already clean technology there was already clean technology out there. And so I was actually able to meet somebody that had created a unit that for $8 a month could supply unlimited air conditioning to a household. And I thought, this can't be true. If this was true, this would be everywhere. Except this same person, when they created this solution for what they thought was a need in humanity, they were sought out by the industry, which found this to be something of a threat. They were offered $350 million for this technology, for the rights to sell this patent to a fossil fuel company. And as you may imagine, this technology did not hit the market. In the day and age that we perhaps transition away from some of this more archaic type of fuel sourcing, maybe this is something that is an ace up the sleeves of such industries to be able to then use. But in the meanwhile, here I am 20 years later, and I'm not paying $8 a month for my bill. I don't know about you. So again, it's not so much really about something not being out there because it doesn't exist as much as why it may not be out there. So with that said, we're not going to get into the discussion of the way that the world works. We will bring some philosophy into this, but that won't exactly be the debate. We want to come and propose a solution about what we can do about this. Case in point, this is really to understand that because something is not out there does not mean it doesn't exist. And if you dig a little deeper, there's going to be a reason why. Today's conversation is going to elucidate that. It's going to go and center around all things that you perhaps maybe didn't believe existed and or that thought there wasn't enough evidence to support. But we're going to go to the bastions of academia themselves. All of the content that I've actually pulled here today will be pulled from the entire summit, will be pulled from, the likes of the names of Harvard University, Columbia, MIT, Caltech, Boston University, Stanford, UCLA. These are the authorities that whenever we have these questions about, well, if this technology actually had merit, if it actually existed, if this was real, why hadn't we heard about it? Well, we're going to hear about it, and we're going to hear about it straight from the horse's mouth. The goal of today is just to give you a snippet, just a preview. Again, we have some 20 slides out of 1,300 as far as what lies in the Physics Meets Physiology course. It's going to serve, hopefully, if we do it right, as an arsenal of personal enlightenment for you, but one which you will also be able to leverage in your personal relationships. In your professional relationships, if that's actually an endeavor that you wish to gain. If you are an early adopter type, if you've been the one well acquainted with energy medicine, perhaps even seen the fruits of the labors of it work in your own life, but also been on the other hand of being ridiculed for it, questioned, interrogated, challenged for it. Today's going to show you a little peek beyond the veil so that you will not simply run from such arguments in this subject. You will actually welcome them and you will win them. So with that said, let's get started. Here's going to be a video from Boston University. It's just 3 minutes long, and it actually goes to show you how we are already using biophysics in research to not only identify issues that might be facing humanity, but improve upon the accuracy even of the way in which means we are doing so. I'd like to foreshadow and have you really focus and pay attention to the fact that this technology is still going to be used to perpetuate the same business model of big pharma that we see today. So this is just the first stepping stone. There's a whole outline of which we'll continue this motif of conversation. But for now, let's go ahead and get started with just this quick video.
Imagine manipulating light waves to see through a skull right into the brain, or using lasers to diagnose a bacterial infection in a matter of minutes. Sounds like science fiction, but at the Center for Biophotonic Sensors and Systems at Boston University, these technologies, many others, you might say, are coming to light.
Biophotonics simply is the use of light to enhance our understanding of biological processes and biological function.
With support from the National Science Foundation, mechanical engineer Thomas Bufano and his team are developing optical microscopes that can image deep into biological tissue, helping scientists observe molecular scale activity. The goal? Revolutionize the diagnosis and treatment of disease.
So how did the experiment go?
Virologist John Connor is working on a method to tag and fingerprint viruses like Ebola using a tag that responds to a certain wavelength of light.
If someone comes in to a clinic and we are concerned that they might have a virus infection, can we take a sample from them and then put in a particle that will act as a beacon that will attach to the virus if it's at all present in that sample?
So is that pretty well enriched?
Yes.
Chemist Larry Ziegler and his team are working with a company called BioTools to develop a test that uses lasers to diagnose a bacterial infection accurately and quickly. They put a sample of the bacteria onto a tiny chip that's coated with metallic nanoparticles. The sample goes into this portable machine that bombards it with lasers, making the bacteria cells vibrate. Each type of bacteria has a unique vibration signature, which can be run through a database to make a match.
So we immediately know what the right antibiotic to prescribe for that specific strain. And we can do this within minutes.
Biomedical engineer Shu Han wants to better understand Parkinson's disease. She attaches light-sensitive proteins from algae to neurons in the brain to observe and even control certain brain activity.
This will allow the neurons to be activated at pulses of light. And then we can control these neurons and turn them on or off by control.
I think we're not able to see this screen, so let me share the desktop version and hopefully this might help. Let me know if you see this. I'm going to start the video over here.
We've been able to see it, Veronica.
Oh, we have?
Yes.
Okay. I read a comment. Let's pick
As a
up where we left
beacon
off from.
that will attach to the virus if it's at all present in that sample.
So is that pretty well enriched?
Yes.
Chemist Larry Ziegler and his team are working with a company called BioTools to develop a test that uses lasers to diagnose a bacterial infection accurately and quickly. They put a sample of the bacteria onto a tiny chip that's coated with metallic nanoparticles. The sample goes into this portable machine that bombards it with lasers, making the bacteria cells vibrate. Each type of bacteria has a unique vibration signature, which can be run through a database to make a match.
So we immediately know what the right antibiotic to prescribe for that specific strain. And we can do this within minutes.
Biomedical engineer Shu Han wants to better understand Parkinson's disease. She attaches light-sensitive proteins from algae to neurons in the brain to observe and even control certain brain activity.
This will allow the neurons to be activated at pulses of light. And then we can control these neurons and turn them on or off by controlling the light.
Ultimately, the goal is to find better drugs and better ways to cure disease.
Bufano says in 5 to 10 years, he expects much of the center's research will move from the lab into the field, shining new light on what's going on inside the body and mind. For Science Nation, I'm Miles O'Brien.
So if we pay attention to some of the key verbiage in that clip, we find that the industry does not disagree with the fact that there is a physics-based option when it comes to human health. In fact, they're using it. You just saw it. But they are using this to do what? They are using this to perpetuate a biochemical model, a pharmaceutical model. Just as you saw, as we're able to tag these specific types of viruses, pathogens, et cetera, by the very unique nature, if you will, their vibratory fingerprint, so too can we use frequency to be able to impact it. Similar to what you may have seen with the opera singer who sings and shatters a glass whenever that the resonance or the vibratory quality of her voice matches that of the glass, we actually can do the very same thing using lasers, using frequency to be able to make an impact with those pathogens. Yet, in this case, we're doing all of these millions and billions of dollars of research to still perpetuate what? To perpetuate a pharmaceutical model. So it's not so much that there is a denial of biophysics, physics, and we'll even get into quantum physics as it pertains to human health, but there is a denial of how we're going to about using that information. What you see before you here is Dr. Green. Dr. Green is a biophysicist, and she has actually put out what is observably a cure for cancer. And she's not doing this with chemotherapy. She's not doing this with radiation. She's not doing this with surgery. She's doing this with light. So she's actually attaching these nanoparticles that we just learned about to the tumors or the cancer cells. And simply by activating a specific wavelength, she's exciting these cells to be able to turn back on, and if you will, almost go back in time to a point whenever they were able to control the cancer naturally. Cancer is something that exists in all of us each and every day. It's the body's job to see and make sure that this is not something that is able to grow beyond the containment of what would allow the homeostasis of the body to continue thriving. So when we lose this ability to regulate cancer is whenever that we start seeing our health go rogue, and after a specific period of time, actually attain the clinical validation of cancer. But what she showed is that we do not need to do chemotherapy. We do not need to do radiation, ongoing treatments, if you will. What she has shown is that in one single therapy, as I've mentioned, where that we have, as you just saw in the previous video, used light waves to turn processes back on in the cell, to speak to the cell, that we have been able to turn the cell's ability for what's called apoptosis, the natural regulatory mechanisms to shut down and inhibit cancer, to turn those back on. And this begets one therapy. It is not going to come with all the side effects of the chemotherapy or the radiation, nor the price. And in just one therapy, we see that 15 days later, we have this tumor not just shrink upon the one single session or treatment, but continue to shrink over these 15 days. You would think this would be all over the news. You would think that this would be receiving all of the grants, all of the funding. It does not. It hasn't received anything. She has to crowdfund all her money for research. Why is that? That is because this therapy and this treatment will not bring in the bottom line and will not yield the P&Ls that we see with the pharmaceuticals way of doing business here. But does this mean that this does not exist simply because maybe up until before today you did not know about this? It does not mean that, right? Next here we have, well, let me actually pause this really quickly so I can just give a little intro. Next we have here some research out of UCLA. This is from Dr. James, who is actually a chemist originally, a chemist who then has dabbled in biophysics. And what he has been able to record here that we're about to see is the cell. Using an atomic microscope, he's actually able to capture the literal songs of our cells. And we talked about the vibratory properties, right, that different viruses or pathogens will have. Well, it doesn't just work exclusively for pathogens and viruses. This goes down, it's the same constant law of creation that goes all the way down to a single cell. And in fact, a single cell is able to tell us, based on the way that it is singing, if it has a sweet story to tell or a somber one. We can tell simply by the sound of a cell now if it has cancer. So when we talk about things such as the ability for music to impact health, and this is kind of met with all of those raised eyebrows and conspiracy theory notions, I remind you, what are we using to break up kidney stones, right? We're using frequency to do that. And so it would make sense that if this works to break up kidney stones, maybe taking some of these same concepts and taking them all the way down to the cellular level isn't so crazy at all. And perhaps we've just seen it. Well, we're about to anyways. Now, in the physics meets physiology course, we go on to talk about not just the song of the cells and what that means and how we may be impacted by specific sounds and how specific sounds may catalyze specific instructions to the cell, but we talk about the geometry created in the process as well. In fact, if you are to look here at just this moment paused in time, there are geometrical figures which form. And I don't show it in this particular summit, but I did in the last, where I took the heartbeat, actually. I took the beat of a heart and we freezed that frame to show you what the geometry of that actually looked like. We took a stethoscope and we converted that sound to a visual image, just as you see here, right? With this sonocytology kind of inspired CymaScope technology, if you will. And so with the sound, we were able to see sound. And in that, when we actually froze those images, if you were to take the frozen image of the sound of the beating of the heart, the same sounds again, which we can see all the way down to the single cell, right? You would get the heart chakra geometry that the Vedics showed us and illustrated thousands of years ago. Quite interesting, right? That we should see millennium later that the geometry lines up, even the wavelengths and the sound, the chant and the frequencies and the tones that were ascribed to this respective chakra by the Vedics all add up when it comes to science. I'm barely getting started. There's a lot more where that came from. But what we have in the way of sound medicine, we tend to look at this from the outside. We tend to look at this from what we can use from the outside world to impact the inside, but think about why that works at all. The ultimate sound therapy is the beat of the heart, is it not? That the thump of the beat of the heart sets the tone, sets the pace for the thump of every beating cell, every vibrating cell in the body. This will be a very interesting notion to explore when we get into talking about how feelings become flesh on day 2 and 3 of the summit. So moving on from UCLA, let's actually go on to what we have next. Here we see that there's research, actual money being spent to study what the effects of 528 hertz, which is a solfeggio scaled harmonic, and what this does whenever that we are using this as it pertains to astrocytes, which are essentially going to be your medics in the brain. They're the ones that deliver nutrients, help with repair supplies, etc. And whenever we are using the 528 hertz, what are we seeing whenever that we combine these two? Well, we're actually able to see that this significantly actually reduces the cell death. Non-coincidentally, in the Solfeggio scale, 528 hertz is associated with DNA repair. Coincidence? Columbia University also has something to say in the matter. In fact, in 2015, they had a study yielded from research in which cell membranes contained antennae-like structures, almost like the villi you would see out of the small intestine, little fiber projecting cilium, actually, literally is what they are. And these cilium were going to receive these vibrations from the outside world that we've talked about. And from there, they actually then give this vibrational information to the inside of the cell. Once the cell receives this vibrational information from the inside, it will move accordingly. So that vibratory quality actually becomes one that mechanically shifts the cell into action or doesn't. This leads us to another topic, one in particular that I am most fascinated with at this time, and I think this is probably representative of the most cutting edge science out there when it comes to biophysics and how it can be used in terms of health. Biotensegrity. So biotensegrity is taking the study of tension, okay, which is a force, and how that the force and the tension within our cells equates to specific actions, right? Now, what conversation did we just come from? We've talked about the cell. We've now talked about the cell membrane. We've talked about the cilium, which sit as receivers for the vibratory outside information, communicates that into the cell, and the cell correspondingly creates action based on this. Depending on what type of instruction, what type of vibration we are getting, it will communicate that corresponding information on how to act. And this is communicated via the tension, which is actually created within the cell. The tension inside the cell can tell it to do quite a few, many things. Harvard doesn't just agree with this, they actually pioneered this field. So by simply modifying the shape of the cell, they could switch cells between different genetic programs. Okay. Cells that spread flat become more likely to divide. So now we're controlling how that cells reproduce. Round cells that were prevented from spreading activated a death program. So apoptosis, just as we talked about with Dr. Hidaya's work, Dr. Green's work, the biophysicist, and how she's able to use light to activate the apoptosis. She's not the only one. We see that Harvard has published on this, although I don't think that you've received any publicity as to these findings, have you? Let's move our beautiful faces out of here so I can read. When cells were neither too extended nor too retracted, they neither divided nor died. Instead, they differentiated themselves in a tissue-specific manner. Capillary cells formed hollow capillary tubes. Liver cells secreted proteins that the liver normally supplies to the blood, and so on and so on. Case in point is that tension within the cell, tension tells tissues what to do. Tension is a part of the trifecta of physics. There is a field, there is a force, there's frequency. They're not all one and of the same, but they're related. And they all come together as a package deal. We talk about all of this in the Physics Meets Physiology course. We show you what it literally looks like as the tension and geometry, almost like this lattice net structure of the cell, begins to shape itself and change according to the tension. Why is this something that we should care about? Well, we should care about this because we can actually use tension purposely within the cell to reset it. Imagine if we have diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, neurological degenerative diseases, and we're able to simply exert a specific field of tension into that cell to reset it. Imagine that. Johns Hopkins is also involved in this conversation. Johns Hopkins University has said that tensegrity structures function as coupled harmonic oscillators. DNA, nuclei, cytoskeleton filaments, membrane ion channels, and entire living tissues exhibit characteristic resonant frequencies of vibration. If you go and you Google about cells having their own frequency and being impacted by frequencies, you're probably going to get met with a Quackwatch search result, right? Well, there you have it. Johns Hopkins University does not agree. Very simply, transmission of tension through a tensegrity array provides a means to distribute forces to all interconnected elements, and at the same time to couple or tune, sorry, our faces are blocking my ability to read here, tune the whole system mechanically as one. So if we have issues where that cells are not signaling properly, we can restore communication by restoring a homeostatic tension state. How is tension altered? Tension is altered from the environment. How is the environment altering the tension? It's doing so with force, with a field. It's doing so with frequency. So if that's how we get to this issue, how does it make sense that using the same principle would not help us to get out of it? Why aren't we using these systems to do so? Why are we still pushing the chemical model? And if we reverse engineer chemistry, what do we get? We get physics. Physics tells chemistry what to do. Putting chemistry into the body has to be broken down into physics to then tell the cells what to do, just as we showed you here today. So why not start at the source? Now let's talk a little bit about chakras, because it's a very sensitive area, especially with much of our audience who believes this to be something that is more along the physiological, spiritual indoctrinations, as opposed to having actual merit in science. At Root Cause Clinic, the latter is the path that we take. The chakras have already actually been substantiated. UCLA, again, who actually does a lot of studies and published in biophysics, and this one from 40 years ago. In fact, it's not anything even new or novel. 40 years ago is when this research I'm about to talk about actually occurred. So Dr. Valerie Hunt, professor of kinesiology at UCLA, actually substantiated that there are different wavelength patterns. If we map with an electromyograph, where we're actually mapping frequencies along the skin with an instrument that allows that to be done, we see that corresponding where the root chakra would be, there is a different frequency. There is a different field detection, as there is in just a couple inches upward in what is known as the sacral chakra. We continue to go into the solar plexus, the heart, the throat, right? And we continue going up the chakra ascension scale, and we see that there is a corresponding frequency change as we do so, verifiably measured. And what's more is that this is not just simply frequency that we have measured. The frequency also correlates to the specific colors associated with the Vedics and what the Vedics cited millennia ago. And as if that's not enough, it actually matches up with the tones or the sound that is associated with these chakras. So this is research. This is just a portion of her research. She actually has several other very interesting avenues in which she's gone down to show proven substantiation of the human aura and biofield, which again, if you go and you read about on Google, will tell you is a bunch of BS. But let's go ahead and take a look for ourselves.
The following film shows the human energy field radiating outward from the body. It dynamically changes based on the physical conditions, the feeling states, the motivations of the person in interaction with energy radiation from objects and living things. The existence of the human energy field, or the aura, was validated and studied by over 12 years of high-frequency recordings in my laboratory at UCLA. This film shows the field not ordinarily seen, but now visible through computer color enhancement. Like all living things, this little dog has a sizable radiant field, even when he sits quietly. Notice now, as he greets his master, the obvious love and affection between them increases the dynamic radiation from their bodies, even the dog's tail and the man's head. No wonder so many people have pets who give them pleasure and provide a vital field of energy to interact with. See the dull radiation from the body of this man eating junk food. All of these foods are lifeless in vibration. They are dead and quite inert, unable to reproduce life. These do not feed the energy field. The vibrations are low in frequency and small in amplitude, providing only calories and chemicals. Without life-giving electromagnetic energies, the man's energies remain dull and small. Notice the layers of vibrating radiation extending from the man's body and the fruit as he touches and eats these living seeds. In contrast, see the static vibrations from the chair and table. Even before eating, these foods nourish the electromagnetic fields and enliven his field. Fruits, vegetables, grains, and seeds are vibrant living substances which enhance the human field and are therefore called health foods. Wherever there is motion in the universe, there is increased flow in the field that humans interact with. See the explosive activity from the waves and from his body. Also, the electromagnetic field of the body is negatively charged or ionized, as are waves or tumbling water, which further expands and heightens his field, giving a physical exuberance and emotional excitement. No wonder that a day at the beach is so exhilarating and vitalizing. We all love a babbling brook and the freshness of outdoor vegetation and mountains. Most of us believe that it is relaxation and beauty which refreshes us. From our research, we have discovered that living plants in rarefied atmosphere provide a richer field of negative ions, which heightens and replenishes our own energy field. Notice that the man's field becomes light in color and high in frequency, sparkles, and radiates some distance from his body. This vignette of child and man is a candid happening, unstaged. Notice that the movement of the child's and the man's head also creates emotion in their energy fields. Exercise, walking, and physical work create an energy field dynamic in the body, which is vitalizing, giving feelings of aliveness. When exercise is done outdoors, fields of growing plants, wind, and air further increase the electromagnetic pool. This scene of mother and son is also unstaged. See that as the child moves into the mother's field, the affection between them changes the overall field to a pink color. Individuals' fields blend and enhance when there is a warm, caring relationship. These energy fields are the largest and the whitest that we have shown. She is oming. On the breath inhalation, the radiant field diminishes, and on exhalation, it expands and envelops the child. We have known for a long time that Gregorian chants, oming, humming, singing, and whistling create an energy which perks up emotions and brings an expanded consciousness. The following film should.
So as you can see from Dr. Hunt's work, we have not only substantiated evidence according to what the Vedics actually theorized millennia ago, we've given you animated proof of seeing that in action. You've seen unstaged scenes where that not just a single energy field from a single individual, or organism is displayed, but how outside vibration, outside interaction from others and the environment actually impact it and see it change in live time. Seeing the mother meditating, oming in the presence of her child, seeing the transformation of the color. Color, by the way, is a wavelength. You talk about a specific nanometer wavelength. 634 nanometers is red. It's a color, right? So we see actual evidence of frequency change that is measurable and captured. This is from 40 years ago. There is way more advanced technology now. Anybody who is 40 years or older, do you remember the world 40 years ago? It has changed. So there is even yet more technology, such as the likes of what we saw with the CymaScope, the ability to measure tension within the cell, impacted, et cetera, that we're seeing at some of these higher educational authorities. And what is out there is not what we're actually talking about, is it? So whenever we have these conversations, and in fact, we got our share of little comments coming up when we posted about this summit, that this is all a bunch of quackery from individuals who do not agree that physics is actually able to be used outside of advanced imaging, outside of X-rays, outside of the kind of common ways that we consider it to be used today in medicine, because physics is being used in medicine. That is undeniable. It's how it's being used. As we just saw, it's being used to still sell you the chemical model, right? Now, when physics goes out and substantiates its publications to show you that perhaps the songs you listen to, the food you eat, the people you spend time with, the emotions and sentiments with which you approach life, relaxation on the beach, receiving ions over slaving away, going into debt to execute the model of what you need from the outside in and not the inside out. All of these don't seem to make their way through the publications, right? Let's go on to the next screen. Let's read the comments here. Actually, looks like we have some comments. Let's see. Yes, how many of you actually loved seeing the little dog? I am a huge dog lover, and seeing specifically why we love dogs, right? Because we engage in their energy field and it synergizes and amplifies ours, as you just saw. Let's go on to the next screen. Let's talk about meridians now. We've talked about chakras, what UCLA had to say, Dr. Hunt. And by the way, again, that's really just a sliver of the research that she produced. She has so much profound discoveries with her work at UCLA. But let's talk about the meridian system. So the chakras are going to be the energy vortices or energy centers that the Vedics identified millennia ago. But the Chinese medicine system actually defers to what are the meridians. Think of these as kind of the energy superhighways of the body. This has been said to be something that has not been able to be evidenced, right? Although a lot of insurance will cover acupuncture for pain management because it does seem to have some merit or work, right? There's been a lot of debate as to how it works. Is it stimulating certain nerve ending points? What is it doing? It's doing something, but they've had to try to come to a tactile, mechanistic, Newtonian answer to explain it until now. So Harvard University has actually done studies about this. Yes, Harvard University delegates money to go and see about Chinese medicine. They have been able to give you a visualization of what is the pericardium meridian. They've done so by using fluorescent dyes, which are injected and then elucidated via physics to be able to show you the pathway of the meridian system. And this, again, is just a 1 hour piece of time, so we cannot go through all of the proofs. We do that in the 80 hours of the course, but there's plenty other research out there, which is using not just the fluorescent dyes, but radioisotopes, which is using infrared or thermography, which is using the ability to map oxygenation levels in the tissue. So there's many different mediums in which the meridians have actually been put to the test, and the same consistent results are yielded. Now, off to the right, you'll see here that we have the specific points of the pericardium meridian. We see the line traced here, okay? Fair enough. Now let's look at the next screen to see what happens whenever we actually capture the imaging of the fluorescent dyes in action. So not only do we see that there is a light body field as evidence that follows specifically this pattern of the pericardial meridian, we see that the acupuncture points, right, the concentrated centers or portals on these lines are more magnified as compared to the rest of the body. And these are going to be areas which could even be unstimulated. So in other research, we've seen that there have been evidence that these particular acupuncture points will produce bigger fields, whether or not that this is something that has acupuncture even going in it or any type of stimulation. So the light body here now finally being made better, evidence substantiated by the language of science, not taking away from it, right? So when the conversation enters the field that we must be perhaps going off of our rocker to open our minds and our horizons to accepting something outside that which we do not see with the naked eye, I'd remind you that we do not see Wi-Fi, right? There's a lot on the spectrum of light that we do not see. In fact, if you look at the spectrum of light, what humans see, it's very small. And that is how small your world and your options will be if you choose to stay in that mechanistic model. So now that we've looked at some of what some of the universities are doing with some very familiar areas of topics, such as the Chinese meridian systems, the chakras, how sound may affect the cell, how we can actually use this to identify via frequency various disturbances in the body and maybe what we can do to rectify that. Let's go a little bit more quantum in our discussion. So this is also yet more research we've taken out of Harvard, Harvard University, but Harvard Medical School. And what this research yielded is that, well, that we have well known that the thymus is the training ground for the immune system, right? We make our blood cells from the bone marrow, and then those are released and they go up to the thymus to be able to be trained so that they can actually learn what is self and what is the outside environment. Many cells do not pass this test. They do not collect $200 and pass go for anybody that remembers Monopoly. They fail and they are eliminated. They don't get to go out there and represent because they have shown when tested against self that they have attacked. So they're not sent out to be able to protect the body if they've shown that they will bite the hand that feeds them. How the thymus has actually done this has kind of been up for debate. We have theorized, is there some sort of linear transportation of proteins around the body that come to the thymus that somehow train and test the cells to say, hey, here's a actual living, breathing figurine of what a muscle cell looks like. Let's see if you attack it or not. No, it's not how it actually works. We know how it works now. Harvard has actually shown that there is a quantum teleportation of information. We don't actually send proteins to the thymus. We send holographic information to the thymus of all proteins in the body. And it then shows this hologram to these cells. And if it bites the hand that feeds it, it is eliminated. The thymus comes up a lot in the root cause clinic scans for individuals who have chronic inflammation, who have autoimmune disease, even individuals who have autonomic nervous system dysfunctions, which we'll get into tomorrow. But what's going on here is that the thymus is not able to properly display these holograms, right, and train and filter the immune system. So then we get candidates who are passing the test who really shouldn't. They go into systemic circulation when they have shown that they not only bite the hand that feeds it, they may do so several times over. We send these out to do a job that they never should have done. Can you imagine what awaits us if we're able to understand that via information downloads, frequencies, lasers, sound wave, etc., we might be able to restore coherency in how that this information is actually going to be communicated, how it's going to be executed? Harvard has shown that we're not needing to work in the world of the Newtonian flesh here to do that. We can simply do so with a transfer of information. Think of it this way. we tend to really get caught up on the teleportation from the time of the Jetsons, again, another 80s reference, if anybody remembers them, and how the world was supposed to be, right? We're supposed to have our flying cars by now, and we haven't yet. We don't have to have something physically transferred. We can actually just transport the information. In the blink of an eye or less, we can transfer the whole template, information, and coding of what something is without actually transferring it. So if we want to show a white blood cell what a muscle cell looks like, that information can erect itself, literally akin to a holographic form, to test that cell without it having to be a physiological actual protein. This is how at Root Cause Clinic that we're able to make such assessments, just as you saw with the frequency tags, to identify disturbance patterns in the body. It may not be something that shows up physiologically in blood-based testing or in imaging. It doesn't have to be a shelled out, fleshed out canvas. It can be simply the blueprint for that canvas. That blueprint has action in the body to direct the action and consequences of the body. The hologram alone. So, if we've seen that Harvard University has shown us that that's the way that merely this mechanism with training the immune system in the thymus works, imagine what not only within the immune system we could do, but each and every other instruction of each and every other cell and each and every other tissue. How many problems are not responding to the physiological interventions? They're not responding because if we take away the physiological shelled out version of this, you still have the etheric template of it. This is what you need to handle. This is what you must deal with. You may have killed an infection already and still be sick. Well, guess what? This hologram is what's left over. And this is still going to put into action and beget a response from the body. If this is an outdated piece of information, your response will remain outdated. Anybody seen the Cirque du Soleil Michael Jackson, not concert, but show in Vegas? I saw this show when it first came out, probably 15 years ago. I don't even remember, maybe longer. And they have Michael Jackson in hologram form performing on stage. Now, if you are watching this hologram and nobody has told you that this is not Michael Jackson, it is so real that you wouldn't know. They could put out a hologram concert with an artist and the crowd would still go wild. They'd hoot, they'd holler because they think they're seeing Michael Jackson. Okay. Now, the difference is if somebody were to take a gun and to shoot that hologram, what's going to happen to that hologram? Is it going to die? It's not. You can't shoot this messenger because this messenger is not of the physiological Newtonian realm and it does not play by those rules. So in this instance, a hologram can still produce a reaction, beget a response. And depending on what that information in the hologram contains, will depend on the type of response we get. If you have an immune system that continues to shoot the gun and it's never able to actually disengage the threat because the threat is not of the physical form, then this response keeps going. It is a shotgun which will never culminate its mission. And you can understand how that might create quite a bit of problems and inflammation, to say the least. So we are using principles of quantum teleportation. We are applying principles of quantum entanglement to the health realm. None other than Harvard University is doing this. In fact, not only can we show that we can use this as the frontier of medicine for physiological impact, it's going to prove a lot less detrimental in the means of side effects because we can encrypt our messages much more soundly when we use quantum teleportation than if we're actually trying to travel these messages over waves. Ever wondered why that we have to encrypt data? Well, if you're using all these same waves, that's a whole other talk that we talk about in the course, but and we're sending information, right? through these radio waves, well, who else has access to that, right? How do we get messages somewhere and keep that privacy? Quantum teleportation only has that as an option. There is no exchange of information going where it should not go. So we can actually utilize this to be able to not only create a true root cause, as we've just shown, down to the information field level approach, but also really curtail a lot of the side effects that we would see when we take a exclusively physiological approach. Now, with that said, if you are doing a Google search as we speak, or if you've just done one period to see whether or not quantum computing, quantum technology actually exists, you would actually see that it's theoretical and has not yet been proven. It doesn't exist, allegedly. It's a nice idea, and we might get there someday, but we're not there yet, they say. Well, we are very proud to have achieved this milestone on sustainable, high-performing, and scalable quantum teleportation systems. The results will be further improved when system upgrades we are expecting to complete by Q2 2021. Who has said this? Fermilab, AT&T, Caltech, Harvard University, NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and the U.S. Department of Defense. They believe that quantum teleportation does exist. They're very proud of it. So, I don't know what you think, but maybe that first initial search you get on Google and what comes up in that algorithm of deliverable results is not exclusively as inadvertent or innocent as it seems. Perhaps now in coming full circle, if you've entered this summit thinking you needed to be sold or proven that such way of approaching health or such field or disciple need to beg to have your attention with an evidence-based perspective, and that it perhaps even was, dare we say, conspiracy, maybe you will still agree that there is a conspiracy here, but perhaps not exactly the same one you entered the picture considering. So is quantum biology a conspiracy theory? You tell me. Let's look at some of the comments here, take some questions. Let's see. My son has had 6 open heart surgeries. He has always used music to calm his trauma. Now you get it. And his dog will bring his heart rate down. Well, you've just seen the evidence which truly works. If something makes you feel better, do we really need to overanalyze and intellectualize something? If there has not been a previous download of indoctrination to substantiate why something feels good to us, do we really need to consider that it doesn't exist or that there's not something there to explain it? No, we're just merely disconnected from the why or the how. But as the science continues to evolve, we're able to see more of that why and more of that how. Fascinating and educational, Sumaki says. I'd love to hear your feeling about handheld quantum devices such as the Healy. I believe that the engineering behind a device is something you have to look at. It doesn't necessarily mean that because you pay for something more expensive that it's a superior product, right? I can pay for a $8,000 bottle of wine. Does that mean that it's going to be better than an $800 bottle of wine? It could be, but by what margin? However, if I take an $8 bottle of wine against an $800 bottle of wine, well, there probably is some difference in craftsmanship, right? What you have to determine is how quickly you will outgrow a device. If you have never done any energy medicine before, if you've not worked with frequencies, you have never tried to balance this canvas with any of it, and you may do well with something like a Healy because this is going to allow for some attunement and calibration to take place. The difference is that a device like the Healy and a device like what we're working with and technology that we're working with is the difference between accounting in a mom and pop type of business versus accounting for Coca-Cola. Accounting for Coca-Cola is going to be carried out back in 20 years ago in college. I think it was the 12th decimal place working with Excel, right? When I took my finance classes, we used Excel to calculate all of the accounting up until I think it was the 12th decimal place. Maybe that's expanded now as the economy has continued to soar and inflation only grows. So if we are doing accounting to the 12th decimal place versus if we are just rounding up or working at the dollar and cents value, this is millions and millions of dollars of difference. Devices which are more finely engineered and able to actually fractionate the frequency to a much more specific level, such as, let's say, a Healy that would put 747 hertz, and a device like a biocharger, which might put 747 hertz, 0.6487258. This is a lot more precise. It's a lot more of a specific knock on the door so that the body goes, oh no, make no mistake, I know that message is for me. If it's very generalized, it's kind of like someone saying, hey, you. Well, I'm walking down the street. Which you? Me, him, them? Working with a higher calibration of engineered technology is like saying, hey, Veronica. Okay, well, that changes things a bit because I'm Veronica. I don't know if any of them are. Definitely grabs the attention and instructs one to pay attention, right? That is how nature works. Nature has very specific frequencies that you could say are fractionated down or very precise. So a device, for example, like a biocharger is going to have that calculation a lot more precise. Does it mean that those are the only things that can help you? No, you can absolutely use something like a Healy device, but you may outgrow that very quickly. So that's kind of the basics, I would probably say, in considering how that some of these more handheld devices are able to work. If you have them for acute measures, let's say child has a stomach ache, you went on a cruise ship, you got norovirus, you want some stuff to help with vomiting. Yes, that would probably be great. You can administer acute frequency in that case. It's not something that is a problem that is chronic for you, where that you're going to want a more fine-tuned scale of engineering. And looks like we've had the comment from like a specific key, tailored suit. That's exactly what I like to liken our services to, is that there is a lot of homeopathics out there which are amazing, such as what we have with DesBio. We have Apex. We've got Physica. All of these are amazing lines, okay? And they work very well. This is like if I were to go shopping off of the rack and find a dress that I'm like, oh my gosh, this is great. And it even looks great on me and I love it. But is that the same as if I went to a custom tailor or couture gown designer and said, sew me into something? Oh no, because that size 2 that looks good off the rack was made to look good for the majority of size 2s. What if you're a size 2 that's a triple D? Well, that's not the general design of the size 2. It doesn't account for having a little bit extra on top, or maybe you've got a lot that you're working with from the back. Well, maybe that size 2 off the rack doesn't account for that. We eliminate those concerns when we sew you into a custom couture frequency. That is what we do at Root Cause Clinic. We do that via our own tinctures here, or we do that via laser. Laser is one of my particular favorites because, and actually we'll talk about lasers tomorrow, but because of the way it can kind of get into the cell, much how we saw that we can use vibrations such as sound to talk to the cell, we can use light. You just saw how light can speak to the cell to see what kind of pathogens, viruses, etc., have invaded it. So light and sound are both energy. They are, in the Physics Meets Physiology course, something that I talk about as a scale of energy. I teach that light actually is something that emerges out of sound. Light is an electromagnetic wave, as it is known. But what really happens is that you have a longitudinal wave or a sound wave. And from this, when this chooses to interact with the environment, when it chooses to share, right, it actually creates a split of 2 photons. And so you could quite literally look at this as singularity, right? Dare I say, if we want to get philosophical, God source. And then we let there be light, literally, not my opinion. I can show you the mathematical proofs for that. And from there, we get to photons, which then create the electromagnetic spectrum. So light is a further extension of sound. Light is part of the journey back to sound. Light and sound both interact with the human body. They interact with energetic orientation as well as the information contained therein. Energy needs a canvas to create. An author cannot be an author without an alphabet, right? So how that is arranged is up to the energetic ensemble of the author, but he cannot create without information that is the alpha, the omega, the alphabet, right? We have a lot of those discussions in the Physics Meets Physiology course. It is meant to be not just educational and bring you evidence-based examples in which that we can, when we come upon these conversations with clients, patients, with our family, you have ammunition and an ace up your sleeve to pull out to say, well, what do you have to say to this? And these same individuals, which will say, if this was actually real, we'd see it published by Harvard, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so Harvard, Stanford, and UCLA, MIT, Caltech, et cetera. These are your definitions of who would have the authority to substantiate that such has actual merit, right? Yes. Okay, here you go. So we arm you with all of this information, but more importantly, we have an applicable way of making sense of it, because it's great to know, but if we're not going to do anything with this information, if we don't know what options are available to us and how we can do something to improve our own storyline, our own life. I talked about on IG Live a couple of days ago that many journeys, and for those of you who are potentially dealing with chronic illness, you've probably have gotten so lost in the symptoms and so lost in the journey of what we don't have and what we're trying to get back to that you forgot why you want to get back to that state to begin with. We forgot the bullseye, the obvious, right? So the information has to be something that is not just information, but something which empowers us to act. What can we do about it? How can we improve our story and live our life? Because if we're all honest here, at the deepest core of energy, the deepest core of energy medicine, we want to live happy, healthy lives. We want to share and love and engage, right? That is the whole purpose of life itself, is to come here to become whole, right? Not to stay fractionated and divided. So there is a very big philosophical undertone that is an experience in and of its own right in the course that is not just about academia, although that was very important to me because I wanted to make sure anybody could take this course. If you're coming to us with a PhD, if you're coming to us as, again, just Dr. Mom, well, that not everybody's going to agree necessarily with the interpretation of the evidence, and that's science, period, and whatever subject you want to talk about. They can't negate that it exists. So that allows us to approach these conversations and not have this dismissal or this disempowerment that we have previously had for a field which we know, which we have seen has worked either for ourselves, worked for others. It allows us to become something mainstream. And really, if we want to be able to have access to better technology developed within the sphere of biophysics, that's what we have to do. It's not appeasement, it's understanding that there is a spectrum. And in avoiding the arguments and being able to allay that for a amicable relationship between Western and or what you could consider to be functional and what we do, which is on the energy medicine or biophysics or that sphere of things, we're going to do better if we can actually meet together than to consider ourselves separate, because actually you'll learn in the Physics Meets Physiology course, nothing is separate. So that is what we have for today. I think I've gotten through everybody's comments. I really appreciate the time you've taken to answer my questions so thoroughly. That I have no problem doing. I have no problem to be thorough. Have you done anything, or would this quantum physics potentially help a partial spinal cord injury? Absolutely. I'd recommend if you can get pulse electromagnetic field therapy, that for healing and regenerating nervous system, anything with circulation, bone, the way calcium is used. For example, the biocharger that we have, this has some 800, 900 different settings. And this has that very precise knock to tell your body, hey, let's get with it. This is what we need to do. You might significantly really allow yourself to heal with a lot less scar tissue. Make sure that calcium deposits are deposited in the bone, not in the tissue, the soft tissues. All of those kind of things can definitely be improved if we're adding frequency to the mix. Great session, very thought-provoking content. Love it. 100% works. And now I know why. Okay. Let's see. Grateful you are back with your lectures. You look brilliantly recharged. Thank you. I came back from Greece. Let's see, what time is it? Oh, we're still okay in time. I came back from Greece and I will be eventually moving there within the next couple of years. It is a place in the world that I feel whole. I feel optimized and invigorated and at my most ability to create just for simply being in those coordinates of the world. Going to the sea and recharging with just a half hour or hour, just frolicking in the waves, allowing the ions of the beach, as you saw evidence today, to recharge me, literally charge me, right? Charge me from the inside out. And in doing that, I just excel. I wake up and lift my head off the pillow and I'm winning already. My chapter of life that I've now entered is one of gratitude. I had a life-changing car accident in Greece while I was there. 1 second would have made the difference of us coming home or not, meaning we would have been killed 1 second. And so in that, I have a second chance, right, to look at and improve upon a life of meaning and purpose, which I've always sought after, but one that I'm going to marry and vow never to abandon from gratitude. If there's one thing I will impart in my message going forward, it's to bring people back to the center chase of life, of why we entered it. It's to discover who we are and how we can share, how our story can interconnect with others, and how our story is the story of others. We are not separate. Too much hate, division in this world, too much separation, and divorce over details, if you will. And I think that that's an era that needs to leave. I think that if we're going to turn to our fellow man and try to help, the first thing we need to take out is the high horse of judgment. You can look across many different disciples philosophically, from the Vedics, right, to the Bible and the good book that preach about this concept, but it has been just theory for the most of us. Because that's human nature, is to go to the textbook theory. Yes, I know we shouldn't do this, but do we do it, right? For me, it took that life-changing moment to wake up every day and remind myself, when I'm about to take an action, perhaps that violates those policies, I remember back to that moment and say, if that were the last action I were to take today, would I be happy to surrender and meet my maker in that moment, in that sentiment, in that vibration, literally? And I say no. So, all right, everybody. We will meet tomorrow at 9 a.m. For part 2. We will actually show and feature some cases from the clinic where that such information as you've seen here today, as used by our technology and applied through the analysis that we have, allows us to create a approach that is not something that, we might see in Western medicine, even functional medicine, and how we go about making those identifications and what that actually, again, means for the people doing the living, the breathing, and the dying out there, right? So you're going to hear from some of our clients firsthand as far as how some of these approaches were different from what they had done before in the past. Some of them even have chosen to abandon their profession and take up this study formally because it was just so life-changing and enamored. And really, if there's, again, one thing I can say is that this should be an experience. It's not just about memorization of information. Too many others are teaching that. You can't live life by memory and memorization. You have to internalize the algorithm, right? So you have the power to organically create from that. Otherwise, if there's no more questions, everybody, I will see you. Oh, Sue has said Messi is here in town today. I'm a big sports fan, everybody. Huge. I will be seeing Mr. Lionel in due time. I got to get out to Miami to see him, or maybe when he comes out toward LA, but I will definitely see that goat. All right, everybody.